A new study is out today focusing on Alzheimer's and its effects day in and day out on the family members and friends who care for people living with the disease. Nearly 7 million adults over the age of 65 have Alzheimer's, dementia in the United States. According to the Alzheimer's Association here in California, that number is over 700,000, and there are 1.3 million caregivers. Now, the latest report from the Alzheimer's Association finds caregivers are facing increasing stress. The top 5 stressors are cost, coordinating with multiple doctors, securing appointments, and getting help taking a break and finding appropriate doctors.
Where to start, how to find the right doctor, understanding the disease. How can I make my way through this very complex system?
Support is so important. Don't wait. Get your family involved, get your friends involved.
Now, when you think of Alzheimer's disease, memory loss and dementia are really the most common symptoms. But now doctors at UCSF are studying a bizarre, often underdiagnosed syndrome that impacts how a person sees, and it's often an early sign of Alzheimer's.
Susan and Charles Stewart will never forget when they first met. She was on vacation visiting from England. He was a friend of a friend. It was love at first sight.
Okay.
Yeah.
4 months later, that first date became forever.
Yeah, we'd only spent 3 weeks together. And we've been married now for 54 years.
54 years, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The secret to their successful marriage may be savoring life's simpler moments.
We walk, we do things together in the kitchen. One of the ways that we get through this is we do a lot together.
A few years ago, Charles was playing one of his favorite games, dominoes.
I just couldn't sequence anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize it was because I was seeing double or wasn't seeing, the numbers.
They went to several doctors, but none of them could identify what was going on.
I remember getting the MRI results and Charles coming in and saying, it's normal. This was in summer of 2020. And I was thinking, normal? I'm really surprised.
They finally went to a neurologist, and their tests told a different story.
When they showed us the scans, which kind of lit up like a Christmas tree.
Charles was diagnosed with posterior cortical atrophy, or PCA, a condition that impacts what his brain tells his eyes to see. It's an underdiagnosed syndrome that is often the first sign of Alzheimer's disease.
Patients who have posterior cortical atrophy, one of their main issues is to get the proper diagnosis, especially at an early stage. What happens is that usually they get to see their general practitioner, their PCP. They get to see eye doctors that don't actually understand what's going on because the eye in and of itself is totally fine. And usually there's a delayed diagnosis because it takes a while for the patient to be referred to a neurologist who knows about this syndrome.
Marianne Chaplot and Renaud Lejoie at UCSF led the first large-scale study of PCA. They found that 94% of patients with PCA had Alzheimer's pathology.
When you think about Alzheimer's disease, usually you think about someone who's in their 70s or 80s, has slowly progressive memory deficits. And we're particularly interested in those cases who have Alzheimer's disease that presents in a different way.
For Charles and Susan, getting that diagnosis was a relief.
When you know something, it's powerful.
The actual waiting for a diagnosis is much worse than the diagnosis itself.
Charles is participating in clinical trials so doctors can better understand this complicated disease. But he also has something special that doesn't come in the form of a drug.
I think it's a gift because it focuses you on trying to make your life and the lives of other people better.
His attitude's fantastic. It's kind of, he makes life, he's very helpful, he's very kind, and it's kind of, for me, it's kind of like living with a 77-year-old that needs a little bit of help and doesn't remember things very well at this point. And we do realize that it's a progressive disease and things will get worse.
He also has a partnership that has proven it can weather any storm in sickness and in health.
PCA occurs in about 10% of Alzheimer's patients, but until now it's been excluded from clinical trials. 94% of PCA patients have Alzheimer's disease. Now, to put that into perspective, 70% of patients with dementia or memory loss are actually diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And we all know an Alzheimer's diagnosis puts the focus on the patient, but what about the people caring for them every day? Coming up, a representative from the Alzheimer's Association joins me live to talk about the support caregivers need right alongside their loved ones. Welcome back. Today, we're taking a deeper dive into how Alzheimer's disease affects not only the person with the condition, but also their caregivers. A new study from the Alzheimer's Association shows in California, 61% of Alzheimer's caregivers reported at least one chronic condition themselves. More than 18% reported depression, and 13% reported frequent poor physical health. Joining me live now is Claire Day, the Chief Program Officer for the Alzheimer's Association Northern California and Northern Nevada chapter. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, we know that an Alzheimer's diagnosis is devastating for the patient, but it's also very difficult for the person's loved one, their caregiver, because not only are they preparing for this long goodbye, as they call it, but they also know that it's going to be an uphill battle caring for this individual. What kind of unique challenges do caregivers face when a loved one is diagnosed with this?
Yeah, it's such a good point. Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, like we saw in the last story, they're progressive. They're going to change over time. And so we're going to see the needs of that person change over time as well. I think there are unique challenges for Alzheimer's as well. And, you know, one of the things that we think about is the fact that these are adults whose behaviors and memories and abilities change. And it's very important for caregivers to be cognizant of that as they're starting to provide assistance, that it's not a child, although it feels sometimes childlike. So really sort of balancing all of that as the dynamic of that relationship changes as well, where the caregiver has to be open to all of the potential deficits that might be coming along the way. It's very frustrating. And then, of course, there's no blueprint for it. So, you know, there's no way to predict the progression that the disease takes and what that caregiver is going to face.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming mentally, physically.
Absolutely.
But there's another aspect of it, financially.
Yes.
The good news is there are better treatments. There are earlier diagnoses that can make someone living with Alzheimer's, make their life better. But that means that they're living longer, and the cost that comes with it can be exorbitant. What kind of resources are available to caregivers when it comes to paying for the treatment?
Yes, and we're an aging nation to begin with,
Right.
who's already, we're fixing things like cardiovascular diseases, which is making us live longer. And so the real lifetime issues around these financial costs is absolutely exorbitant. And there are some support services out there. There are some respite programs, and there are some organizations that can provide that help. But I think one of the challenges is that Alzheimer's disease and other dementias are considered to be custodial care. They're not covered by Medicare. They would only be covered by Medi-Cal if the person, sort of spends down all of their money. So it's important to look for county resources, to look for organizations like the Alzheimer's Association, other community-based organizations that might be offering financial assistance to pay for caregiving and to pay for some of those services as well. And it also means some pre-planning, right? So look at those financial planning opportunities and really know what you have so that you can think about what you need for the next 5 to 10 years.
It's so helpful to know that there are resources, though, out there if you do need some financial help.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to your study, though. It shows that so many of the caregivers have their own physical and emotional issues that they're also dealing with while they're caring for somebody with Alzheimer's. What kind of resources are available to them to help them get some help?
Yeah, care of the caregiver is our biggest concern because they're so focused on the person with dementia.
Right.
They often miss their own doctor's appointments. So make sure you go for your annual physical. Make sure that you're thinking about your own physical health. Thinking about taking a respite, not just to do things like running errands and going to the grocery store, but actually plan that time where you would be able to get a true break. And think about who you can involve, whether it's friends or families who can actually help with some of these tasks. It's really hard to sometimes let go of those responsibilities as a caregiver, but it's important for people to do that. And then look for services like support groups and educational programs, and even our 24/7 helpline that can help you create a plan for yourself.
Yeah, we're going to mention that helpline at the end of this segment, but I also want to get to one last question. There could be people at home that are watching that maybe they themselves are not a caregiver, but their loved one is. Maybe a parent is caring for their parent, or maybe a spouse. How can people outside of that unit help a caregiver who may really need it?
I think it's really important that we start talking about Alzheimer's and dementia, and we start talking about the needs of these caregivers. So don't be afraid to reach out and say, hey, I just want to check in on you and see how I can help you. And I think the other piece that goes along with that is, what can we all be doing to decrease our own risks of dementia, and thinking about some of those healthy habits like eating right and exercising, the one no one wants to talk about, but it actually does help your well-being as well. And so providing those opportunities for caregivers to get a break, even if it's to go out for a walk in the sunshine while we have it.
Yeah, just a reminder to check in with the caregivers.
Absolutely.
Because so often you're wondering how the patient is doing, but you really need to also be checking in on the person caring for that patient.
Absolutely.
All right. Claire Day, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us from the Alzheimer's Association. Now, the Alzheimer's Association has a 24/7 helpline that we mentioned just a few moments ago that could answer your questions and connect you to valuable resources. It's 1-800-272-3900. Again, 1-800-272-3900. And we'll be right back. Well, we know about the challenges that Alzheimer's disease brings for patients and their caregivers, all adults, but it's also a tough subject to talk about with kids. Now, the Alzheimer's Foundation of America has a new tool to help. It's a book called Gardening with Grandma. They say it's meant to help readers help their kids understand what is happening or why their loved one is behaving a certain way. And it provides tips on how to answer questions in an age-appropriate way. The book is available in English and Spanish on the Foundation's website, and all the proceeds go towards programs, services, and research towards treatments for Alzheimer's disease. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining us here at 3 o'clock for our in-depth look at Alzheimer's disease, which impacts so many, and the condition's impact on caregivers. We invite you to share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag KPIX. The CBS TV News is next here on KPIX. Local news continues on our streaming service, CBS News Bay Area. And I'll see you at 5 o'clock.